The snow fell in thick, relentless waves across the small California mountain station, transforming the wooden platform into a frozen wasteland that seemed determined to bury everything beneath its white fury. Zelda Harrison stood beside her worn leather trunk, watching as the last passenger from the stagecoach disappeared into the warmth of the station house, leaving her alone in the bitter December cold of 1882. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves, and her breath came out in desperate little clouds that vanished almost immediately into the storm. The station master had made it abundantly clear that no one was coming for her, that the family who had hired her as a governess through correspondence had decided they no longer needed her services, and that she should find her own way back to wherever she had come from. The problem was that Zelda had nowhere to go back to, having spent her last dollars on the journey from Missouri to this God-forsaken place in the Sierra Nevada foothills. She pressed her hands together and tried to think through the panic that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The station master had already gone inside, locking the door behind him with a finality that spoke volumes about what he thought of young women who found themselves stranded without prospects. The wind howled through the scattered pine trees that surrounded the station, and Zelda realized with growing horror that she might actually freeze to death out here if she did not find shelter soon. Her dark wool dress was designed for travel, not for standing motionless in a blizzard, and already she could feel the cold seeping through the layers of fabric to settle into her very bones. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, hope flaring bright and desperate in her chest. Through the curtain of falling snow, she could make out the shape of a rider approaching on a large bay horse, both man and animal looking like ghostly apparitions in the white-out conditions. The rider pulled up near the platform, and Zelda got her first clear look at him as he dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and a face that was all hard angles and weathered tan skin. His eyes, when they met hers, were a startling shade of gray-blue, the color of storm clouds over the mountains. "Station closed?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble that somehow cut through the wind. "Not closed," Zelda managed, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "Just not willing to help me." The cowboy looked her over with an assessing gaze that was neither judgmental nor inappropriate, merely practical. His eyes landed on her trunk, then moved back to her face. "You got somewhere to be." "I was supposed to," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "The Henderson family. They sent word they needed a governess, but when I arrived, the station master told me they had changed their minds. He said I should go back where I came from, but I cannot afford the fare, and even if I could, the next stage will not come through until the storm passes." The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating eyes. Snow gathered on his shoulders and hat brim, but he did not seem to notice or care. Finally, he stepped forward and bent down to grasp the handles of her trunk. The ease with which he lifted, it told her everything she needed to know about his strength. "You are coming home with me," he said simply, securing the trunk to the back of his saddle with practiced efficiency. Zelda stared at him, caught between relief and fear. "I do not even know your name." "Nathan Cole," he said, turning back to look at her. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here. You will freeze to death if you stay out in this storm, and I am not the kind of man who leaves people to die when I can do something about it." He paused, seeming to read the uncertainty on her face. "I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson. She is about 60 years old and mean as a snake when she wants to be, but she will make sure everything is proper." You will have your own room, and once this storm clears, if you want to leave, I will take you wherever you need to go." It was not much of a choice, really. Zelda could either trust this stranger or freeze to death on a train platform in the middle of nowhere. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you. My name is Zelda Harrison." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Harrison," Nathan said, and there was something almost formal about the way he said it, as though they were being introduced at a church social rather than in the middle of a blizzard. "Can you ride?" "Not well," she admitted. "You will ride with me then," he said, swinging back up into the saddle and then reaching down to her. "Give me your hand." Zelda hesitated for only a moment before placing her frozen hand in his much larger one. His grip was firm and warm, and she felt a jolt of something she could not quite name as he pulled her up behind him, with seemingly no effort at all. She had never been this close to a man before, had never wrapped her arms around a male waist or pressed herself against a male back, but survival trumped propriety. She held on tight as Nathan urged his horse forward into the storm. The ride to the ranch was one of the most miserable experiences of Zelda's life. The wind bit at every exposed inch of skin, and the snow came down so thick that she could barely see past Nathan's broad shoulders. She buried her face against his back, feeling the solid warmth of him through his heavy coat, and tried not to think about how easily they could get lost in conditions like these. But Nathan seemed to know exactly where he was going, guiding his horse with absolute confidence through the white wilderness. After what felt like hours but was probably closer to 45 minutes, buildings began to emerge from the snow. First a barn, large and sturdy looking, then a house that was bigger than Zelda had expected. 2 stories with a wide front porch and smoke rising from 2 separate chimneys. Nathan rode right up to the porch steps before dismounting and reaching up to help Zelda down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, numb from cold and the unaccustomed position of riding. "Get inside," Nathan said, his tone brooking no argument. "I will take care of the horse and bring your trunk." The front door opened before Zelda could move, and a stout woman with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes appeared in the doorway. "Nathan Cole, what have you brought home now?" the woman demanded, but there was no real anger in her voice, only exasperation mixed with something that might have been fondness. "Found her stranded at the station," Nathan called back. "She needs warming up and a place to stay until the storm passes." The woman, who had to be Mrs. Gunderson, made a tusking sound but gestured for Zelda to come inside. "Well, do not just stand there freezing, girl. Get yourself in here by the fire." Zelda stumbled up the porch steps and through the door into the most wonderful warmth she had ever experienced. The house was indeed heated by 2 fires, one in what appeared to be a parlor to the left and another in a large kitchen straight ahead. The interior was neat and well-maintained, with simple but sturdy furniture and clean wooden floors. Mrs. Gunderson shut the door firmly behind Zelda and began helping her out of her snow-covered cloak. "You look half frozen," the older woman said, her tone softening slightly. "Come into the kitchen. I will get you some hot coffee and something to eat." "Thank you," Zelda managed through chattering teeth. "I am sorry to impose. Nathan would not have brought you if he did not think you needed help," Mrs. Gunderson said matter-of-factly, leading Zelda into the large kitchen where a fire crackled cheerfully in a stone fireplace. "Sit down there by the fire and get yourself warmed up." Zelda sank into the wooden chair closest to the hearth and held her hands out to the flames. Gradually, painfully, feeling began to return to her fingers and toes. Mrs. Gunderson bustled about, pouring coffee from a pot that sat on the stove and ladling what smelled like beef stew into a bowl. She set both in front of Zelda, along with a thick slice of buttered bread. "Eat," Mrs. Gunderson commanded. "You look like you have not had a decent meal in days." It was true enough. Zelda had been carefully rationing what little food she could afford during her journey west, and she fell on the stew with an enthusiasm that would have mortified her under other circumstances. It was delicious, rich and hearty, exactly what her frozen body needed. She was halfway through the bowl when Nathan came in, carrying her trunk as though it weighed nothing. Snow covered his hat and shoulders, and his cheeks were ruddy from the cold. "I will take this up to the spare room," he said to Mrs. Gunderson. "You will do no such thing until you have gotten out of those wet clothes," the housekeeper retorted. "The last thing we need is you catching your death. Put the trunk by the stairs and go change. I will take Miss Harrison up to her room when she has finished eating." Nathan's eyes met Zelda's across the kitchen, and she saw amusement flicker in their gray-blue depths. "Yes, madam," he said meekly, though the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He set the trunk down where indicated and disappeared down a hallway, presumably to change into dry clothing. "That man," Mrs. Gunderson said, shaking her head, "always bringing home strays. Last month it was a half-frozen calf he found in a snowdrift. Month before that, a dog with a broken leg. Now it is a young woman." "I hope I am less trouble than the calf," Zelda said, finding herself able to smile despite everything. Mrs. Gunderson let out a bark of laughter. "I like you already, girl. What is your name?" "Zelda Harrison." "I came from Missouri to take a position as a governess, but the family changed their minds." "Hendersons," Mrs. Gunderson said with a sniff. "I heard about that. Louise Henderson decided at the last minute that she would rather have her sister come help with the children." "Thoughtless woman, leaving you stranded like that." She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from Zelda. "Well, you are safe here for as long as you need. Nathan is a good man, one of the best I have ever known, and this is a respectable household. How long have you worked for him?" Zelda asked, curious despite her exhaustion. "Going on 10 years now," Mrs. Gunderson said. "His parents hired me when they started the ranch, and when they passed 5 years back, Nathan kept me on. He runs a good operation here, raises cattle and horses, sells them down in San Jose and Sacramento. He works hard, treats his men fair, and has never once been anything but a gentleman." She fixed Zelda with a stern look. "I am telling you this so you know you are in a safe place. Nathan would never take advantage of a woman in your situation." "I appreciate that," Zelda said quietly. "And I appreciate everything both of you are doing for me. I truly did not know what I was going to do when he found me." "Well, now you do not have to worry about it, at least until this storm passes," Mrs. Gunderson said. She stood and gestured for Zelda to follow. "Come on. Let me show you to your room. You look about ready to fall over." Zelda followed the housekeeper up a narrow staircase to the second floor. There were 4 doors along the hallway, and Mrs. Gunderson opened the one at the far end. The room inside was small but comfortable, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a wooden dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over what Zelda assumed was the ranch yard, though currently all she could see was swirling snow. "Nathan will bring your trunk up in a bit," Mrs. Gunderson said. "There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring you up a hot brick for the bed later to help you warm up. Do you need anything else right now?" "No, thank you," Zelda said. "This is wonderful." Mrs. Gunderson nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Alone for the first time in hours, Zelda sank down onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. She had come west with such hope, believing that she was finally taking control of her own life after years of living with distant relatives, who made it clear she was a burden. The position with the Hendersons had seemed like a godsend, a chance to make her own way in the world and perhaps even save enough money to have her own place someday. Instead, she had ended up stranded in a snowstorm, dependent on the charity of a stranger. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried when her parents died of typhoid when she was 16, had not cried through 4 years of living as an unpaid servant in her aunt's house, and she would not cry now. She was alive, she was warm, and she was safe. That was more than she had been able to say 2 hours ago. A soft knock on the door made her sit up straight. "Come in," she called. Nathan entered, carrying her trunk with the same easy strength he had shown before. He had changed into dry clothes, a simple blue shirt and dark trousers, and his hair was slightly damp where he had tried to comb it back. He set the trunk down at the foot of the bed and straightened. "I hope the room is acceptable," he said. "It is more than acceptable," Zelda assured him. "Mr. Cole, I cannot thank you enough for what you have done, if you had not come along when you did." "No need to think about that," Nathan said firmly. "You are here now and you are safe." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know this situation is not ideal, and I want you to know that I have no expectations of you. You are a guest in this house, nothing more or less. When the storm passes, if you want to return to Missouri or go anywhere else, I will help you arrange it. If you would like to stay in the area and look for another position, I can ask around and see what might be available." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Zelda asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "You do not know me at all." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, and she found herself unable to look away from those storm-colored eyes. "My mother used to say that we are all just one piece of bad luck away from needing help ourselves," he said finally. "She believed in lending a hand when you could, because someday you might be the one who needs it. I have tried to live by that." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest, Miss Harrison. Supper will be around 6 if you are feeling up to it." After he left, Zelda sat on the bed for several more minutes, thinking about what he had said. She had met many people in her 22 years, and most of them had been far more concerned with their own interests than with helping others. Nathan Cole was clearly a different sort of man, and she found herself curious about him despite her exhaustion. Eventually, she roused herself enough to open her trunk and pull out a nightgown. She changed quickly in the cold room, washed her face in the basin, and crawled under the quilt. True to Mrs. Gunderson's word, the housekeeper appeared a short time later with a brick wrapped in flannel that she tucked in at the foot of the bed. The warmth was heavenly, and Zelda felt herself drifting off almost immediately, lulled by the sound of the wind howling outside and the knowledge that she was, for the moment at least, safe. When she woke, the room was dark and she had no idea what time it was. She lit the lamp on the bedside table with the matches she found there and checked the small watch pinned to her dress, which she had draped over a chair. Nearly 6 o'clock. She had slept for hours. Quickly, she dressed again, this time in a simple gray dress that was slightly less travel-worn than the one she had been wearing, and did her best to tidy her dark brown hair. Without a proper mirror, it was difficult, but she managed to get it pinned up in a reasonable approximation of neatness. Downstairs, she found Nathan and Mrs. Gunderson in the kitchen. The table had been set for 3 and wonderful smells filled the air. Nathan stood when she entered, another gesture of courtesy she had not been expecting. "Miss Harrison," he said, "I hope you are feeling better." "Much better, thank you," Zelda said. "I apologize for sleeping so long." "Nonsense," Mrs. Gunderson said, carrying a platter of fried chicken to the table. "You needed the rest. Sit down and eat." The meal was delicious and surprisingly pleasant. Nathan asked polite questions about her journey west, and Zelda found herself telling them about her life in Missouri. about her parents' death, and her subsequent years living with her aunt and uncle. She did not mention how miserable those years had been, but she suspected both of them could read between the lines. "Do you have any other family?" Nathan asked. "A brother," Zelda said. "William. He is 5 years older than I am, and he went west to seek his fortune in the silver mines in Nevada about 3 years ago. I have not heard from him in over a year, and I do not know if he is still there or if he has moved on somewhere else." "Mining is rough work," Nathan said carefully. "And the camps are not always safe." Zelda nodded. She had long since faced the possibility that her brother might be dead, though she tried not to dwell on it. "He was all I had left," she said quietly. "When the Hendersons' offer came, I thought it might be a chance to be closer to where he was, that I might be able to find him again someday." "There are inquiry services in San Jose," Mrs. Gunderson offered. "They might be able to help you locate him if he is still in the area." "I will look into it," Zelda said, though she knew she could not afford such services. Still, it was kind of the housekeeper to suggest it. After dinner, Nathan excused himself to go check on the animals, leaving Zelda to help Mrs. Gunderson with the dishes. The older woman proved to be a fountain of information about the ranch and its owner. The Cole family had come to California during the gold rush, but had quickly realized that there was more money to be made in providing beef to the miners than in mining themselves. They had started with a small herd and gradually built it up over the years, acquiring more land and establishing a solid reputation for quality livestock. "Nathan was planning to get married about 6 years ago," Mrs. Gunderson said as they dried the last of the dishes. "Sweet girl named Mary Thompson. But she got sick with pneumonia that winter and passed away before they could have the wedding. He has not looked at another woman since, just throws himself into the work here." "That is terribly sad," Zelda said, feeling a pang of sympathy for the man who had saved her. "It is," Mrs. Gunderson agreed. "But life goes on, and Nathan is still young, only 28. He should have a family, children. This ranch deserves to have young voices running around again." She gave Zelda a sideways look that was hard to interpret. "But he is stubborn, that one, says he is happy enough as he is." The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Zelda spent most of her time in the parlor, where she found a small collection of books and busied herself with reading. Nathan was in and out, tending to the livestock and making sure everything on the ranch was secure. When he was inside, he seemed content to sit quietly by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes just staring into the flames with an expression that suggested his thoughts were far away. On the second evening after Mrs. Gunderson had retired to her small room off the kitchen, Nathan looked over at Zelda from his chair across the fireplace. "What will you do?" he asked abruptly. "After the storm, I mean." Zelda set down her book. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I should try to find another position, though I am not sure how to go about it without references. The Hendersons certainly will not provide them, given that I never actually worked for them." "What kind of work can you do?" Nathan asked. "I can teach reading, writing, mathematics, and music," Zelda said. "I can sew and do fine needlework. I can manage a household and keep accounts. I am a reasonably good cook, though not as good as Mrs. Gunderson." She tried to keep the frustration out of her voice. "Unfortunately, none of that seems to matter much if no one will hire me." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his gray-blue eyes thoughtful. "I might have an idea," he said slowly. "But I want you to think about it carefully before you answer, and I want you to know that you can say no without any consequences." Zelda felt her heart begin to beat faster. "What kind of idea?" "I need help here," Nathan said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Mrs. Gunderson is getting older, and while she would never admit it, The work is becoming too much for her. The house needs a proper manager, someone who can handle correspondence, keep the accounts, manage supplies, and help with the cooking and cleaning. I have been meaning to hire someone for months, but I have not gotten around to it. You are offering me a position? Zelda asked, hardly daring to believe it. I am, Nathan said. Room and board plus $30 a month. That is more than most governesses make, but the work here is hard, and you would be expected to do quite a bit. I am gone a lot during the day, and sometimes I have to travel to San Jose or Sacramento for business, so you would be responsible for keeping things running here. He paused. And I want to be clear about something else. This would be a proper employment arrangement, nothing more. You would have your own room, your privacy, and my respect. I will not tolerate any gossip or innuendo from the ranch hands or anyone else. Zelda's mind was racing. $30 a month was indeed generous, more than she had expected to make as a governess. And the work, while hard, did not sound unmanageable. More than that, though, there was something appealing about the idea of staying here, of having a real place and a real purpose. I would like to accept, she said carefully, but I want to make sure this is truly what you want, not just an act of charity. I need the help, Nathan said bluntly. I have been managing on my own and with Mrs. Gunderson for too long, and it is affecting the efficiency of the ranch. If you can do what you say you can do, you will be earning every penny of that $30. He stood and extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Harrison? Zelda stood as well and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, and she felt that same strange jolt of awareness she had experienced when he had pulled her up onto his horse. We do, Mr. Cole. Nathan, he said. If you are going to be working here, we might as well be on a first-name basis. Zelda, she replied, feeling suddenly shy. Zelda, he repeated, and something about the way he said her name in that deep, warm voice made her stomach flutter in a way she had never experienced before. The storm finally broke on the third day, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Zelda stood at her window that morning, watching the sun rise over the white-covered landscape, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was not what she had planned when she had left Missouri, but it felt right in a way that nothing had in a very long time. Mrs. Gunderson was delighted when Nathan told her about the new arrangement. Thank the good Lord, the older woman said fervently. Maybe now I can finally take that trip to see my sister in Sacramento without worrying about this place falling apart. Over the following days, Zelda settled into her new role. Mrs. Gunderson showed her where everything was kept, explained the household routines, and introduced her to the ranch hands who came by for meals. There were 5 regular workers. Old Charlie, who had been with the Coles since the beginning, 2 brothers named Hank and Tom who handled most of the cattle work, a young man named Jimmy who was learning the trade, and a quiet half-Mexican, half-Irish man named Diego who had a gift with horses. They were all respectful to Zelda, touching their hat brims when they saw her and thanking her politely for the meals. She suspected Nathan had given them a stern talking to about proper behavior, and she appreciated it even as she felt slightly embarrassed by the necessity. The work kept her busy from dawn to well past dark. She helped Mrs. Gunderson with cooking and cleaning, took over the household accounts and correspondence, and began organizing the somewhat chaotic state of Nathan's business records. She discovered that he was actually quite successful, with buyers as far away as San Francisco regularly requesting his cattle and horses. But his record-keeping left much to be desired. I am no good with papers, Nathan admitted one evening when she asked him about a particularly confusing set of invoices. I can tell you every head of cattle on this ranch, where it came from, and what it is worth, but writing it all down is another matter. That is what I am here for, Zelda said, making a note to reorganize his entire filing system when she had time. As winter gave way to early spring, Zelda found herself settling into a comfortable rhythm. She woke before dawn to help Mrs. Gunderson prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her mornings cleaning and managing household tasks, devoted her afternoons to paperwork and accounts, and spent her evenings mending clothes or reading by the fire. It was hard work, harder than she had ever done before, but it was also satisfying in a way that her life with her aunt had never been. What surprised her most, though, was how much she enjoyed Nathan's company. He was a quiet man, not given to unnecessary chatter, but when he did speak, he was thoughtful and often quite funny in a dry, understated way. He treated her with unfailing respect, always courteous but never overly familiar. And yet, as the weeks passed, Zelda found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit by the fire together, talking about the day or sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. She caught herself watching him sometimes, admiring the way he moved with such unconscious grace, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the way his hands, rough and scarred from work, could be surprisingly gentle when he was examining a newborn calf or soothing a nervous horse. She told herself it was nothing, just appreciation for a kind employer, but she knew she was lying to herself. Spring brought longer days and new work. The cattle had to be moved to higher pastures, and Nathan was gone for days at a time with his men, driving the herd up into the mountains. Zelda threw herself into her work during these times, trying not to notice how empty the house felt without Nathan's presence. Mrs. Gunderson noticed, though, and gave her knowing looks that Zelda pretended not to see. One evening in late April, Nathan returned from a week-long trip to Sacramento, where he had gone to finalize a large sale. Zelda heard the sound of hooves in the yard and found herself rushing to the door before she could think better of it. He dismounted with that familiar, easy grace, and when he saw her standing on the porch, his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. "Zelda," he said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there before, a warmth that went beyond simple friendliness. "Welcome home," she said, and then blushed furiously because she had called it home as though it were hers, not just a place where she worked. But Nathan did not seem to mind. His smile widened. "It is good to be home," he said. "I have something for you." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. Zelda took it, curious and confused. Inside was a beautiful book, a collection of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, bound in green leather with gold lettering. "I remembered you saying you liked poetry," Nathan said, suddenly looking uncertain. "I saw this in a bookshop in Sacramento and thought of you." Zelda held the book like it was made of gold and diamonds. No one had ever given her such a thoughtful gift before. "Nathan, this is beautiful." "Thank you." "You are welcome," he said softly, his eyes holding hers. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Zelda could not quite name, but that made her skin feel warm and her pulse race. Then Diego called out from the barn, something about a mare ready to foal, and the spell was broken. Nathan turned away, but not before Zelda saw the look in his eyes, a look that suggested he had felt whatever had just passed between them as strongly as she had. That night, lying in her bed, Zelda admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Nathan Cole. It was foolish, dangerous even given their respective positions, but she could not seem to help it. He was everything she had never dared to dream of. Kind, honorable, hardworking, and so handsome it sometimes hurt to look at him. But he was also her employer, and she knew that nothing could ever come of her feelings. As spring turned to summer, the tension between them grew. Zelda caught Nathan watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable. They found excuses to spend time together, to linger over coffee after the evening meal, to walk together in the cooler hours of dusk when the work was done. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their hopes and dreams, their fears and disappointments. Nathan told her about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and how much he missed them, about Mary and how her death had nearly destroyed him. "I thought I would never care about anyone that way again," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. "It hurt too much to lose her." "Love is always a risk," Zelda said softly, "but that does not mean it is not worth it." Nathan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw longing mixed with fear. "What if I am not brave enough to take that risk again?" "You are one of the bravest men I have ever known," Zelda said. "You face down stampedes and mountain lions and blizzards without blinking. I think you are brave enough for anything if you choose to be." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was both tentative and intimate. "Zelda, I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Yes." But before he could speak, Mrs. Gunderson called from inside that there was a problem with the stove, and the moment was lost. Nathan dropped her hand and stood, frustration clear on his face. "We will talk later," he promised. But later that evening, a rider came from town with news that there had been a fire at one of the neighboring ranches and they needed help. Nathan left immediately with his men, and Zelda did not see him again for 3 days. When he finally returned, exhausted and covered in soot, he barely had time to wash and change before he had to leave again, this time to San Jose to meet with buyers. The pattern continued through the summer, one crisis after another keeping them apart just when it seemed they might finally have the chance to address what was growing between them. Zelda tried to be patient, tried to tell herself that running a ranch was demanding work, and that Nathan's responsibilities had to come first. But as the weeks passed with stolen glances and unfinished conversations, she began to wonder if perhaps she had misread the situation, if what she felt was one-sided after all. In August, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was addressed to Zelda, and the handwriting made her gasp. She tore it open with shaking hands, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "What is it?" Mrs. Gunderson asked, looking up from the bread she was kneading. "It is from my brother," Zelda whispered. "William is alive." The letter explained that William had indeed been in Nevada for the past few years, but had recently moved to San Francisco, where he had found work as a clerk in a shipping company. He had finally saved enough money to inquire after his sister's whereabouts, and had traced her through her aunt in Missouri to the Henderson family, who had forwarded his letter to the ranch. He wanted her to come to San Francisco, wrote that he had a small but respectable apartment and that she could stay with him while she looked for suitable work. He even enclosed money for her journey, a sum that must have represented a significant portion of his savings. Zelda sat down heavily, the letter clutched in her hands. She should have been overjoyed. For years, she had dreamed of finding her brother again, of having family once more. And here was the answer to her prayers, a respectable situation with her own flesh and blood in a thriving city full of opportunities. But all she could think about was leaving Nathan. "You will go, of course," Mrs. Gunderson said, but her voice was sad. "I do not know," Zelda said honestly. "I should want to go. William is my brother, my only family." "But your heart is here," the older woman said gently. Zelda looked up at her, tears blurring her vision. "How did you know?" "Child, I have eyes," Mrs. Gunderson said. "And so does Nathan." though he is too stubborn to admit what he feels. You two have been dancing around each other for months now, and it has been painful to watch." "He was in love with Mary," Zelda said. "Maybe he is not ready to love again. Maybe he just needs a push, Mrs. Gunderson suggested. The thought of losing you might be exactly what he needs to stop being so afraid." Nathan came home that evening to find Zelda's letter sitting on the kitchen table where she had left it. He read it in silence, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Zelda with something that might have been panic in his eyes. "When do you leave?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I have not decided if I am going," Zelda said. "Of course you are going," Nathan said, setting the letter down with more force than necessary. "He is your brother. You should be with your family." "I have made a life here," Zelda protested. "I have responsibilities, work that I enjoy. I cannot just abandon it all." "I will manage," Nathan said curtly. "I managed before you came, and I will manage after you are gone." His words stung like a slap. Zelda felt tears threatening and stood abruptly. "Fine," she said, her voice shaking. "If that is how you feel, then I will make arrangements to leave immediately." She turned to go, but Nathan caught her arm. "Wait," he said, and his voice was raw. "That is not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Zelda demanded, whirling to face him. "Because it sounded very much like you cannot wait to be rid of me." "I am trying to do the right thing," Nathan said desperately. "You have a chance at a real life with your family in a city where you will have opportunities you could never have here." "How can I stand in the way of that?" "You are not standing in the way," Zelda said. "I am choosing, or I would be if you would give me a reason to stay." They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Mrs. Gunderson, who had been watching from the doorway, cleared her throat loudly. "I am going to bed," she announced. "You two need to stop dancing around this and just say what you both have been feeling for months." With that, she disappeared down the hallway, leaving them alone. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and looked at Zelda with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am in love with you," he said, the words bursting out of him as though they had been held back too long. "I think I have been falling for you since that first day when you stood there in the snow, freezing and afraid, but still holding your head high. I tried not to feel it, told myself it was too soon, that I was betraying Mary's memory, that you deserved better than a rough rancher who spends his days covered in dust and manure." He took a step closer, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "But I cannot keep lying to myself, and I cannot let you go without telling you the truth. I love you, Zelda. I love your strength and your kindness and your sharp mind. I love the way you hum when you are working and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love how you have made this house feel like a home again." Tears were streaming down Zelda's face now, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you for so long, but I thought you were still mourning Mary, that you could never feel that way about me." "I will always carry Mary in my heart," Nathan said softly. "But she would not want me to spend my life alone and afraid. She would want me to be happy, and you make me happy, Zelda. Happier than I ever thought I could be again." He leaned down and kissed her then, a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Zelda wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, feeling like her heart might burst from the joy of it. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Please stay. Not as an employee, not as someone I am helping out, but as my wife. Marry me, Zelda. Make this ranch your home, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here with me." "Yes," Zelda said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, longer this time, deeper, full of all the longing that had been building between them for months. When they finally came up for air, Nathan was laughing, a joyous sound that Zelda had never heard from him before. "We should write to your brother," he said. "Invite him to the wedding. I want to meet the man who is going to be my brother-in-law." "He will like you," Zelda said confidently. "Everyone likes you." "Mrs. Gunderson does not always like me," Nathan pointed out. "Mrs. Gunderson loves you like a son," Zelda countered. "She just shows it by bossing you around." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about their future together. Nathan wanted to wait until fall for the wedding, to give William time to arrange leave from his work and make the journey from San Francisco. Zelda thought that sounded perfect. It would give her time to prepare, to make a dress, to plan the kind of simple but meaningful celebration she had always dreamed of. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. William wrote back immediately, his joy at his sister's good fortune clear in every line. He arrived in early October, a tall young man with Zelda's dark hair and an easy smile. He and Nathan took to each other immediately, and Zelda found herself blinking back happy tears as she watched her brother and her future husband laughing together on the porch. "You found a good one," William told her privately. "I can see how much he loves you." "I know," Zelda said. "I am the luckiest woman alive." The wedding took place on a beautiful October day when the leaves on the aspens were turning gold, and the air had that perfect crispness that promised winter was still far away. They were married in the parlor of the ranch house, with only William, Mrs. Gunderson, and the ranch hands in attendance. The local preacher from San Jose came out to perform the ceremony, and Zelda wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself. When Nathan lifted her veil and looked down at her, his eyes shining with love and joy, Zelda knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. This was not the life she had planned when she had left Missouri all those months ago, but it was so much better than anything she could have imagined. "I love you," Nathan whispered as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. "I love you too," Zelda whispered back. "Always." Their life together settled into a comfortable rhythm as autumn gave way to winter. Zelda threw herself into being a rancher's wife with the same determination she had brought to every other challenge in her life. She learned to ride properly, surprising Nathan with how quickly she took to it. She learned the cattle business, memorizing bloodlines and prices and the names of buyers. She turned the ranch house into a real home, warm and welcoming, the kind of place where neighbors stopped by for coffee and cowboys knew they would always find a hot meal and a kind word. And every night, she fell asleep in Nathan's arms, grateful beyond measure for the blizzard that had brought her to this place and for the man who had looked at her unwanted trunk and decided that she was worth saving. The following spring brought news that Zelda was expecting their first child. Nathan was beside himself with joy, fussing over her constantly until she had to order him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. Mrs. Gunderson was delighted, immediately beginning to knit tiny blankets and gowns. "I told you this ranch needed young voices," she said smugly. The baby, a boy they named Nicholas after Nathan's father, was born on a sunny day in September, exactly 1 year after that fateful snowstorm that had changed everything. He had his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment Nathan held him for the first time, Zelda knew that their son would grow up surrounded by love. William came to visit whenever he could get away from San Francisco, and they were all delighted when he announced 2 years later that he was engaged to a young woman he had met at his church. The wedding was in the city, and Nathan and Zelda made the journey with Nicholas and their new daughter, Clara, who had been born the previous spring. Life continued its steady rhythm of work and joy, challenges and triumphs. There were hard times, droughts that tested the ranch's resources, harsh winters that took a toll on the livestock, prices that fluctuated wildly. But Nathan and Zelda faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. They added 3 more children to their family over the next decade. Twin boys named Thomas and Timothy, who kept everyone on their toes with their endless energy and mischief. And finally, a daughter they named Mary, in honor of the woman whose death had once nearly broken Nathan. It felt right to Zelda, this acknowledgement of the past even as they looked toward the future. Mrs. Gunderson stayed with them until she was nearly 75, finally retiring to live with her sister in Sacramento, only when her health made it impossible for her to continue working. She died peacefully in her sleep 2 years later, and Nathan and Zelda made sure she was buried in the small cemetery in San Jose with a headstone that read, "Beloved friend and second mother." As the years passed, the ranch prospered under their joint management. Zelda's business sense and Nathan's ranching expertise proved to be an unbeatable combination. They expanded their holdings, bought out a neighboring property when the owner decided to move back east, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock that extended up and down the California coast. Their children grew up strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with the ranch work as they got older. Nicholas proved to have his father's gift with animals and eventually took over much of the day-to-day management of the cattle operation. Clara showed a talent for numbers and began helping her mother with the business accounts while she was still in her teens. The twins were the wild cards, always getting into some scrape or another, but they had good hearts and worked hard when it mattered. And little Mary, the youngest, had her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength, a combination that suggested she would be a force to be reckoned with as she grew older. On a cool evening in early December, more than 20 years after that fateful snowstorm, Nathan and Zelda sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were grown now. Nicholas married with a baby of his own, Clara engaged to a young lawyer from San Jose, the twins working as ranch foremen on a spread down near Monterey, and Mary away at a young ladies' academy learning the kinds of things her mother had once taught to other people's children. "Do you ever think about that day?" Nathan asked, taking Zelda's hand in his. "When I found you at the station." "Every day," Zelda said honestly. "I think about how scared I was, how certain I was that my life was over, and then you came riding out of that storm like some kind of miracle." "You were the miracle," Nathan said softly. "You brought this place back to life. You brought me back to life." Zelda leaned her head on his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days in Missouri. "We saved each other," she said. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, and I gave you a reason to stop hiding from life." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over that snow-covered station platform so many years ago. The ranch spread out around them, bustling with life and promise, a legacy they had built together through hard work, determination, and love. "I would do it again, you know," Nathan said suddenly. "If I could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen, all the hard times and the struggles, I would still lift your trunk and tell you that you were coming home with me." "And I would still say yes," Zelda replied, lifting her face to kiss him. "I would always say yes." As winter settled over the California mountains once again, bringing snow and cold and the kind of weather that had once nearly claimed Zelda's life, the ranch house glowed with warmth and light. Inside, there was laughter and love, the sound of grandchildren playing and dinner cooking and life being lived to its fullest. Zelda stood at the window one snowy evening, watching the flakes fall just as they had that day so long ago, and felt nothing but gratitude. She had been unwanted baggage once, left to freeze in a storm with no prospects and no future. But a cowboy had seen her worth when no one else did, had lifted her trunk and her life, and given her everything she had never dared to dream of. She turned from the window to find Nathan watching her, that same look of love in his eyes that had been there on their wedding day and every day since. He held out his hand to her, and she went to him without hesitation, letting him pull her close. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" he asked, his arms tightening around her. "For seeing me," she said. "For choosing me. For loving me." "That was the easiest thing I have ever done," Nathan said, kissing the top of her head. "Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life." They stood together in the warmth of their home, surrounded by the life they had built, and Zelda knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not a fairy tale with a perfect prince and a castle, but a real life with a good man and a home full of love. It was messy and hard sometimes, full of work and worry and challenges that seemed insurmountable. But it was theirs, built on a foundation of trust and respect, and a love that had only grown deeper with time. And it had all started with a snowstorm, an act of kindness, and a simple declaration that had changed both of their lives forever. "You are coming home with me." The ranch continued to thrive as the years rolled by, becoming one of the most respected operations in Central California. Nicholas took over full management when Nathan finally decided to step back at age 65. Though the older man still spent his days riding the property and offering advice when asked. Clara and her husband built a house on the far edge of the property, and their children grew up playing with their cousins, keeping the ranch full of young voices, just as Mrs. Gunderson had always wanted. The twins eventually returned home, settling down with wives of their own and taking positions as managers of different divisions of the now sprawling coal ranch empire. And Mary surprised everyone by announcing that she had no interest in marriage, at least not yet, but very much wanted to go to the new state university and study animal husbandry. Nathan and Zelda supported her decision wholeheartedly, proud of their daughter's independence and drive. William remained close to his sister throughout his life, visiting several times a year with his own growing family. His children and Zelda's grew up more like cousins than second cousins, bonded by family ties and shared summers spent on the ranch. As Nathan and Zelda grew older, they found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took long rides together in the cool morning hours, exploring parts of their property they had not visited in years. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play, sharing memories of the early days when it had just been the two of them against the world. "You have any regrets?" Zelda asked one evening when they were both well into their 60s. Nathan considered the question carefully, as he always did. "I regret that my parents did not live long enough to know you," he said finally. "They would have loved you. And I regret every moment I wasted being afraid to tell you how I felt." He smiled at her, his hair now silver but his eyes still that same striking gray blue. "But no, not really. Not about anything that matters." "Neither do I," Zelda said. "Even the hard times, the times when we struggled or fought or worried we would lose everything, I would not trade them. They made us who we are. We have had a good life," Nathan said simply. "The best life," Zelda agreed. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from across California. The ranch house and yard were full of people, all of them touched in some way by the lives of Nathan and Zelda Cole. There were former ranch hands and their families, business associates who had become friends, neighbors who had relied on the Coles' generosity and fair dealing for decades. Nicholas gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure, talking about his parents' love story and how it had shaped his understanding of what marriage should be. "My father once told me that he found my mother in a snowstorm," Nicholas said, raising his glass. "But the truth is they found each other, and in doing so they built something that will last far beyond their years. They built a family, a legacy, and a love that has been an example to all of us. To Nathan and Zelda Cole, may they have 40 more years together. Hear, hear." The crowd chorused, glasses raised high. Zelda looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the home she and Nathan had built together, at the life that had grown from a single act of kindness in a snowstorm, and felt her heart swell with gratitude and joy. She reached for Nathan's hand, and he squeezed it gently, his eyes telling her everything she needed to know. They did not get 40 more years together, but they got 20, and they were beautiful years full of love and laughter and the satisfaction of watching their legacy continue to grow. Nathan passed away peacefully at age 88, with Zelda holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. His last words were for her. "Thank you for coming home with me." Zelda lived for 5 more years after Nathan's death, surrounded by family and spending her days doing the things she loved. Reading, spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and taking slow rides around the property she and Nathan had built together. She spoke often of her husband, keeping his memory alive through stories and remembrances. When she passed away quietly in her sleep at age 86, it was in the same bedroom where she had slept her first night at the ranch, where she had given birth to 5 children, where she and Nathan had loved and laughed and built a life together. On her bedside table was the book of poetry Nathan had given her all those years ago, worn from countless readings but still treasured. She was buried next to Nathan in the family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of an oak tree they had planted together on their 10th anniversary. The headstone was simple but beautiful. Zelda Harrison Cole, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She came home in a snowstorm and brought warmth to all who knew her. The ranch continued on through the generations, run by Nicholas's children and then their children, a testament to the foundation that Nathan and Zelda had laid all those years ago. The house remained in the family, and every Cole child grew up hearing the story of how their great-great-grandmother had been stranded in a blizzard, and how their great-great-grandfather had lifted her trunk and changed both of their lives forever. It became a family legend, the kind of story that was told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a reminder of the power of kindness and the importance of taking chances on love. And every time it snowed in the California mountains, someone in the Cole family would look out the window and remember Zelda, standing alone on that frozen platform, and Nathan, riding through the storm to save her. Because that was the truth at the heart of their story. They had saved each other. Nathan had given Zelda a home and a future when she had neither, and Zelda had given Nathan the courage to love again, to open his heart after loss and find joy in living. Together, they had built something lasting and beautiful, a love story that had started in the most unlikely of circumstances and had endured through decades of life's inevitable challenges and changes. And if anyone in the family ever doubted the power of fate or the importance of kindness to strangers, they needed only to think of that December day in 1882, when a cowboy found a young woman in the snow, lifted her trunk, and said 5 simple words that changed everything. "You are coming home with me." Those words had been a promise, and Nathan Cole had kept that promise every day of his life. He had given Zelda a home, Not just a physical place, but a sense of belonging and love that had sustained her through everything life brought their way. And she had given him the same in return, transforming his house into a home and his solitary existence into a life full of love and family and purpose. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried that legacy forward, each generation learning from the example Nathan and Zelda had set. The Cole Ranch became known not just for its quality livestock and good business practices, but for its reputation as a place where people looked out for each other, where a stranger in need could find help, where kindness was valued as much as hard work. The story of Nathan and Zelda became part of the fabric of San Jose itself, repeated by old-timers in the town saloon, and taught to school children as an example of how the West was really won. Not by gunfighters and outlaws, but by ordinary people who showed extraordinary kindness and built lives of meaning and purpose through love and hard work. And so their love story lived on, long after both of them had passed into memory, a testament to the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that being unwanted baggage in a snowstorm can be the beginning of the greatest adventure, and that love, when it is real and true and deep, can build something that lasts forever.